Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and reaching for your phone, and it does not turn on, not because the battery is dead, not because you forgot to pay your phone bill, not because of a software glitch, but because somewhere, thousands of miles away from where you are sitting right now, a missile struck a building. A very specific building. A building that most people on Earth have never heard of, in a city most people cannot find on a map. And that building, that one single unremarkable looking factory, was responsible for manufacturing the tiny silicon chips that power your smartphone, your laptop, your car's navigation system, your hospital's MRI machine, your country's military defense grid, and the artificial intelligence systems that are quietly reshaping every industry on the planet. Your entire modern life, the device in your hand, the car in your driveway, the ATM down the street, the satellite overhead, all of it depends on components made in one place. One island, one company. One geological pinpoint on the map that sits directly in the crosshairs of the most dangerous military standoff of the 21st century. Sounds like a thriller novel, right? The kind of high-stakes plot you'd see in a Hollywood film about geopolitical catastrophe? It is not fiction. This is the actual, documented, quietly terrifying reality of the world we live in today. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that should keep strategists, economists, and world leaders awake at night, is that the overwhelming majority of people on Earth have no idea it exists. They use their phones, they drive their cars, they swipe their credit cards, they stream their entertainment. They live entirely inside a technological civilization that rests on the most fragile, most dangerous, most geopolitically explosive supply chain in human history. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on all of it. We are going to follow the story of a tiny chip, a small island, a genius engineer, and the global superpower struggle that is currently determining the future of every nation on Earth. Welcome to the story of the microchip, and the war that may decide who controls it. Here is what makes this story so deeply strange. We live in a world of staggering complexity, a world of 195 sovereign nations, a world where the United States has a defense budget of nearly $900 billion per year, where Germany builds precision engineering to tolerances measured in micrometers, where Japan has pioneered robotics and electronics for half a century, where South Korea has built one of the most dynamic technology economies on the planet, where China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty in a single generation and become the world's manufacturing superpower. These are nations with brilliant engineers, vast capital resources, sophisticated universities, world-class research institutions, and every strategic incentive to dominate the most critical technology of the modern era. And yet, somehow, when it comes to manufacturing the most advanced microchips in the world, all of these nations combined are almost entirely dependent on a single island the size of the state of Maryland. How is that possible? How did the most strategically important technology in human history end up concentrated in one place? A place that is not the United States, not Germany, not Japan, not China, but a small island that two of the world's nuclear-armed superpowers are currently, actively, dangerously fighting over? How did humanity, with all its intelligence, all its resources, all its strategic foresight, allow itself to become so completely, so catastrophically dependent on a single point of failure? And perhaps, most urgently, what happens to the world if that single point of failure actually fails? The answer to those questions involves a story that stretches back 4 decades. It involves a business model that nobody had ever tried before, a technology race that makes the space race look modest, and a geopolitical chess match that is currently being played out in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Tokyo, with the future of the global economy hanging in the balance. To understand all of it, we need to start at the beginning. The island is Taiwan, officially the Republic of China, a mountainous, subtropical island of 23 million people sitting in the Taiwan Strait, roughly 160 kilometers off the southeastern coast of mainland China. The company is TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and the numbers, when you actually confront them, are almost impossible to absorb. TSMC alone manufactures approximately 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the chips built on process nodes of 7 nanometers or smaller, which power everything from Apple's iPhone processors to NVIDIA's AI supercomputing chips to the guidance systems in the world's most advanced military hardware. Apple's A-series and M-series chips, the processors inside every iPhone and Mac, are manufactured exclusively by TSMC. NVIDIA's H100 and B100 data center chips, which power ChatGPT, Google's AI systems, Meta's content recommendation algorithms, and virtually every major artificial intelligence application on the planet, manufactured by TSMC. Qualcomm's Snapdragon processors powering Android devices worldwide, TSMC, AMD's Ryzen and EPYC chips, TSMC. Broadcom, MediaTek, Marvell, Apple Silicon, all TSMC. In its most recent fiscal year, TSMC's revenue exceeded $70 billion. Its market capitalization has touched $600 billion, placing it among the most valuable companies ever to exist on Earth. It operates over a dozen major fabrication facilities in Taiwan, running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, never stopping. And it all sits on an island that the People's Republic of China has explicitly, publicly, and repeatedly claimed as its own sovereign territory, stating with official government policy that reunification will occur by force if necessary. The Chinese military has conducted live-fire exercises simulating a blockade of Taiwan. Chinese military aircraft cross Taiwan's air defense identification zone on a near-daily basis. The People's Liberation Army Navy has expanded to become the largest naval force in the world by number of ships. The single most valuable and strategically critical industrial asset on Earth sits directly in the center of one of the most volatile military flashpoints since the Cold War. This is not a technology story, this is a civilizational risk story. To understand how the world arrived at this extraordinary situation, we need to travel back to Taiwan in 1987. The Cold War is entering its final decade. Japan is dominating global consumer electronics. South Korean conglomerates like Samsung and LG are beginning their ascent. American semiconductor companies, Intel, Texas Instruments, Motorola, are powerful but increasingly strained by the enormous costs of staying at the technological frontier. Building and operating a semiconductor fabrication plant, known as a fab, is extraordinarily expensive. The equipment alone costs hundreds of millions of dollars. The facility requires constant upgrades as transistors shrink and manufacturing processes evolve. For most chip companies, maintaining their own fabrication was an enormous drag on capital and management attention. Into this environment stepped a 55-year-old Taiwanese-American engineer named Morris Chang, and he had an idea that would permanently and irrevocably reshape the global economy. Morris Chang was not a newcomer to the industry. He had spent over 2 decades at Texas Instruments, rising to become one of the most senior and respected engineers in the American semiconductor business. He understood the physics of chip manufacturing as deeply as almost anyone alive. But he also possessed something rarer than technical brilliance, a profound insight into the economic structure of the industry. Chang observed that every major chip company at the time was what the industry called vertically integrated, meaning they designed their own chips and manufactured them in their own factories. This model required massive capital investment, created enormous operational complexity, and forced every company to be simultaneously brilliant at both the science of chip design and the engineering of chip manufacturing, 2 entirely different disciplines. Chang's insight was elegant in its simplicity and radical in its implications. What if there was a company that only manufactured chips, but manufactured them for everyone else with no competing products of its own, no interests to compete with its customers? A company whose entire reason for existing was to manufacture other companies' chip designs with the highest possible quality at the most competitive cost, at the cutting edge of what physics and engineering allowed. He called this the pure play foundry model. With $220 million in initial funding, including significant backing from the Taiwanese government, which recognized the strategic opportunity, Morris Chang founded TSMC in Hsinchu, Taiwan's industrial heartland, in February 1987. Most people in the industry thought the idea was interesting but modest. A contract manufacturer, a service business, hardly the kind of venture that changes the world. They were spectacularly wrong. What Morris Chang built was not merely a factory, it was a completely new industrial philosophy, and it unleashed forces that permanently transformed the structure of the entire technology industry. Before TSMC, if you wanted to make chips, you needed to be a massive corporation. You needed billions of dollars in capital, enormous engineering teams, complex supply chains, and decades of manufacturing expertise. The barriers to entry were so high that only the largest corporations in the world could compete. After TSMC, the equation changed entirely. A small group of brilliant engineers with a great chip design could simply hand their blueprints to TSMC and have them manufactured to world-class specifications. The barrier to entry for chip design collapsed almost overnight. This single shift unleashed an explosion of innovation that the industry had never seen before. Companies that could never have afforded their own fabrication plants suddenly became possible. Qualcomm, today one of the most powerful chip companies in the world, with its Snapdragon processors and billions of Android devices, was founded on the explicit assumption that TSMC would handle manufacturing. NVIDIA, now the most valuable semiconductor company on Earth and the engine of the artificial intelligence revolution, adopted the fabless model and never looked back. Apple designed its own silicon, but sent all manufacturing to TSMC. AMD eventually spun off its manufacturing operations entirely, becoming fabless and turning to TSMC for its most advanced chips. The business model these companies follow is called fabless. They design chips, but own no fabrication facilities. At the leading edge of semiconductor manufacturing, TSMC currently manufactures chips at process nodes of 2 nanometers and below, transistors so small that they are literally smaller than the width of a strand of human DNA. At this scale, the engineer is no longer just battling conventional physics. Quantum effects become significant. Electrons behave in ways that defy classical intuition. Heat management at atomic scales creates problems that require entirely new engineering approaches. TSMC has spent over 35 years and hundreds of billions of dollars in cumulative capital investment building the knowledge, the processes, the equipment ecosystems, and the human expertise to operate at this frontier. Their technology lead over their nearest competitors is currently estimated at between 3 and 5 years. And in the semiconductor industry, where every generation of improvement takes years and billions of dollars, that gap is essentially insurmountable in the near term. The world did not just become dependent on TSMC by accident. It became dependent on TSMC because TSMC became the best in the world by an enormous margin, and the world optimized around that excellence, trading resilience for efficiency. That trade-off, made quietly over 3 decades of economic decisions, is now the central strategic vulnerability of the entire global economy. To truly grasp why TSMC cannot simply be replaced, why you cannot decide on Monday to build a competing facility and expect it to be operational in any reasonable time frame, you need to understand what actually happens inside one of their fabrication plants. Building a modern semiconductor is not manufacturing in any conventional sense of the word. It is not assembly. It is not machining. It is not even precision engineering, as most people understand the term. It is closer to performing surgery at the scale of individual atoms. The process begins with silicon. Specifically with ingots of silicon grown as single crystals of extraordinary purity, containing fewer than 1 foreign atom per billion silicon atoms. These ingots are sliced into wafers, thin circular discs polished to atomic level smoothness. A single particle of dust, invisible to the human eye, is sufficient to ruin an entire wafer worth thousands of dollars. TSMC's fabrication clean rooms are classified as Class 1, meaning fewer than 1 particle per cubic foot of air. For comparison, a hospital operating room, where surgeons perform open-heart surgery, is classified as Class 10,000. The air inside a TSMC fab is 10,000 times cleaner than the air a cardiac surgeon breathes while operating on a patient's heart. Workers inside the fab wear full-body cleanroom suits, called bunny suits, that cover every inch of skin to prevent contamination from human skin cells or breath. The fabs themselves are engineered with vibration isolation systems so sensitive that a truck driving past on the road outside would, without mitigation, disrupt the manufacturing process. The actual circuit printing process is called photolithography. At its core, it works like photography, using light to transfer a pattern onto a surface. But the light TSMC uses is nothing like ordinary light. To manufacture chips at 5 nanometers and below, TSMC uses machines called extreme ultraviolet lithography systems, EUV machines, manufactured exclusively by a Dutch company called ASML. There is no other company in the world that makes these machines. ASML holds an absolute global monopoly on EUV lithography technology, itself the product of decades of research and development. Each EUV machine costs approximately $150 million. Each machine weighs roughly as much as a fully loaded Boeing 737. Each machine contains approximately 100,000 precision-engineered components sourced from hundreds of suppliers across dozens of countries. Each machine uses a high-powered laser to blast tin droplets approximately 50,000 times per second. A single advanced TSMC fab requires dozens of these machines, operating continuously. Each wafer that passes through a TSMC fab undergoes over 1,000 individual manufacturing steps. Some steps occur at temperatures approaching absolute zero. Others occur at pressures mimicking conditions found on the surface of stars. The total manufacturing time for a single wafer, from raw silicon to finished chips, is approximately 3 to 4 months. The scale of what TSMC has built in Taiwan represents decades of accumulated knowledge, refined processes, trained workforce expertise, and supply chain relationships that simply cannot be recreated quickly. Even TSMC itself, when building new fabs in Arizona, Japan, and Germany, is finding that replicating the performance of its Taiwan operations takes years longer than expected. This is not a factory. It is an entire industrial civilization, one that took 35 years to build and cannot be copied overnight. Now let us confront, with full clarity, what happens if this system breaks. In 2020 and 2021, the world got a small, partial, relatively mild preview of what semiconductor supply disruption looks like in practice. COVID-19 disrupted global supply chains. Demand for consumer electronics surged as the world shifted to remote work and schooling. Automotive manufacturers, which had canceled chip orders at the start of the pandemic expecting demand to collapse, found themselves unable to source the chips they needed when demand recovered faster than expected. The result was a global semiconductor shortage that cost the automotive industry alone an estimated $210 billion in lost revenue in 2021. Ford, General Motors, Toyota, Volkswagen, the world's largest automakers, sat on nearly completed vehicles that could not be finished because they lacked a $5 microcontroller chip. Factories were idled. Production schedules collapsed. The price of used vehicles in the United States rose by 30% because new vehicles could not be delivered. Consumer electronics faced 6 to 12-month wait lists. Hospital equipment procurement was disrupted. The cascading effects touched virtually every industry in the developed world. And that was caused by nothing more than a supply chain disruption, not a physical destruction of manufacturing capacity, not a military conflict, not a blockade. Academic researchers, defense analysts, and government economists have modeled the economic impact of a military conflict over Taiwan. The numbers are staggering. A full Chinese blockade of Taiwan, even without a single fab being physically destroyed, would trigger a global economic shock estimated at between $2 trillion and $10 trillion in lost global GDP in the first year alone. Some models suggest the cumulative economic damage over 5 years could exceed the total economic output of the entire United States. The disruption would be simultaneous and total across every sector. That depends on advanced technology, which, in the modern economy, is every sector. Artificial intelligence development would halt. Every major AI model, GPT, Gemini, Claude, Grok, runs on data center chips manufactured by TSMC. Without those chips, the expansion of AI infrastructure that is currently reshaping the global economy would freeze overnight. Defense systems would face critical shortfalls. The United States military's most advanced weapon systems, the F-35 fighter jet, the Virginia-class submarine, the Aegis missile defense system, all depend on chips manufactured in Taiwan. In a conflict scenario, the country fighting over Taiwan would simultaneously be depleting the manufacturing capacity it depends on to build the weapons it needs to fight. Healthcare systems would face equipment crises. Modern hospitals run on sophisticated technology. MRI machines, CT scanners, ventilators, robotic surgical systems, patient monitoring equipment, all chip-dependent. The financial system would face unprecedented stress. High-frequency trading systems, banking infrastructure, payment processing networks, cryptocurrency operations, all built on chip-dependent computing infrastructure. The interconnection is total, the dependency is complete, and the single point of failure is a 143-kilometer stretch of water between Taiwan and mainland China. Governments around the world have recognized this vulnerability, and the response has been the largest coordinated industrial policy mobilization since World War II. The United States Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act in August 2022, committing $52.7 billion in direct subsidies and tax incentives specifically to rebuild domestic semiconductor manufacturing capacity. The stated goal was explicit: reduce American dependence on Taiwan for critical chip production. TSMC is constructing 3 major fabrication plants in Phoenix, Arizona, with total committed investment exceeding $65 billion. Intel is building 2 new fabs in Ohio with $20 billion in investment. Samsung is constructing a facility in Taylor, Texas. These are the largest manufacturing investments in American history. But here is the sobering reality that strategic planners must confront. Even with all of this investment, American fabs will not reach full-scale production of the most advanced chips until at least 2030. And even then, the total advanced chip manufacturing capacity outside Taiwan will remain a small fraction of TSMC's Taiwan operations for years beyond that. The gap is closing, but slowly and at enormous cost. Pledging 43 billion euros to establish advanced semiconductor manufacturing capacity on European soil. In Germany in 2023, with production expected to begin in the late 2020s. Japan has committed over $13 billion in government subsidies to attract semiconductor investment. TSMC opened its first Japanese fab in Kumamoto in early 2024, with a second facility already under construction. The Japanese government has treated semiconductor security as a matter of national survival. China faces the most acute and desperate situation of any major power. Since 2019, the United States and its allies have imposed escalating export restrictions specifically designed to prevent China from obtaining the most advanced semiconductor manufacturing technology. The restrictions cover not only finished chips, but the manufacturing equipment required to produce them, including, critically, ASML's EUV lithography machines, which the Dutch government has blocked from export to China under pressure from Washington. China has responded by pouring unprecedented resources into its domestic semiconductor industry. Official and unofficial estimates suggest China has committed over $150 billion in state funding to semiconductor development. Chinese chipmaker SMIC has made significant advances, but remains estimated to be at least 2 to 4 technology generations behind TSMC's leading-edge processes. The United States, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have formed what analysts describe as an informal Chip 4 alliance, a coordinated effort to maintain technological leadership in semiconductors while limiting China's access to cutting-edge chip technology. This is not conventional trade policy. This is economic warfare, a deliberate attempt to maintain a strategic chokehold over the technology that determines military and economic power in the 21st century. And the battlefield is a 35 nanometer transistor. So where does this extraordinary situation ultimately lead? What are the scenarios that analysts and strategists are wargaming in the years ahead? The first scenario, and currently the most likely in the near term, is continued deterrence. Taiwan remains de facto independent. TSMC continues operating at full capacity. The world slowly, expensively, and imperfectly diversifies semiconductor manufacturing over the course of the next decade. No military conflict occurs because the economic interdependence, including China's deep and growing dependence on Taiwanese chips. But geopolitics is not always rational, and deterrence is not permanence. The second scenario involves what strategists have called the silicon shield theory, the idea that Taiwan's semiconductor dominance is itself the most powerful deterrent against Chinese military action. Any military assault on Taiwan that destroyed TSMC's facilities would eliminate the very industrial asset that makes Taiwan strategically valuable in the first place. The chip factories cannot be relocated under fire. They cannot be seized intact under combat conditions. Their value exists only if they continue operating. Critics of the silicon shield theory point out a critical weakness. If China ever succeeds in developing its own advanced semiconductor manufacturing capability, thus eliminating, this is precisely why American export restrictions targeting Chinese chip technology are not merely economic competition. They are, quite explicitly, an attempt to keep the silicon shield in place by ensuring China cannot manufacture the chips it would need to feel secure in launching a conflict. The third scenario is the one that nobody wants to discuss, but everyone is quietly preparing for. Credible reports, partially confirmed by Taiwanese officials, suggest that TSMC has contingency plans to render its own fabrication facilities inoperable in the event of a Chinese military takeover. The logic is strategic. If China cannot seize a functioning TSMC, the primary strategic prize of an invasion disappears. The facilities, without their people, their processes, their supply chains, and their accumulated knowledge, are simply expensive empty buildings. This contingency, the possibility that the world's most valuable industrial asset contains its own self-destruct mechanism, represents perhaps the most extreme expression of the silicon shield strategy. The fourth scenario is the one that policymakers in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo are desperately working to achieve: successful diversification. If the investments currently underway in the United States, Japan, and Europe succeed as planned, and that is a substantial conditional, the world could, by the mid-2030s, have a meaningfully more distributed semiconductor manufacturing base. Multiple countries capable of producing advanced chips, no single catastrophic point of failure. The challenge is that this scenario requires sustained political will across multiple election cycles, enormous continuing capital investment, time that the current geopolitical trajectory may not provide, and the solution of deeply difficult engineering and workforce problems that money alone cannot instantly resolve. We are, right now, in the most dangerous window. The years before new capacity outside Taiwan comes online, while China's military capabilities continue their rapid expansion and the geopolitical pressure on the Taiwan Strait continues to intensify. The race between diplomatic deterrence and military risk is happening in real time. Here's what I want you to take away from everything we have discussed today. Look at the device in your hand right now, your phone, your tablet, whatever screen you're using to watch or read these words. Inside that device is a chip manufactured in all probability by TSMC, a chip that was born in a clean room 10,000 times purer than a hospital operating room, a chip whose transistors are smaller than a strand of your DNA, a chip that took 3 months to manufacture, passed through over 1,000 individual processing steps, and was born from the most sophisticated industrial process ever developed by human civilization. That chip exists because of a decision made by Morris Chang in 1987. It exists because thousands of engineers in Taiwan dedicated their careers to mastering physics at the atomic scale. It exists because of investment decisions made by corporations, governments, and pension funds around the world. And it exists because, so far, A fragile balance of deterrence, economic interdependence, and diplomatic management has prevented the conflict that could end it all. We have built something breathtaking, a civilization of technological wonder, supercomputers in every pocket, every human being on Earth potentially connected to every other human being, artificial intelligence systems capable of passing medical licensing exams, writing legal briefs, generating art, and accelerating scientific discovery at speeds that were unimaginable a decade ago. And we balanced all of it, every single bit of it, on 143 kilometers of contested water. That is not an accident. It is the result of decades of rational economic decisions, each individually reasonable, collectively creating a systemic risk of civilization-scale proportions. Every company that chose faiblesse efficiency over manufacturing resilience, every government that chose trade openness over strategic redundancy, every investor who chose returns over supply chain security. The world is now paying in diplomatic urgency, in hundreds of billions of dollars of emergency industrial policy, in the quiet dread of strategic planners who understand exactly how fragile the current arrangement is for those decades of optimization. But here's the other truth, the one that cuts against pure pessimism. The fact that the global economy depends so deeply on Taiwan's continued stability and independence is also, in a very real sense, Taiwan's greatest protection. Every government that has an iPhone in its citizens' pockets, every corporation whose products run on chips manufactured in Hsinchu, every military whose weapons depend on Taiwanese silicon, all of them have a concrete material stake in Taiwan's security. The silicon shield may be fragile, but it is real. The microchip did not just change technology, it changed the nature of economic interdependence. It changed what warfare costs. It changed who holds power and how that power is projected. And it created a new kind of strategic deterrence. Not nuclear deterrence, not military deterrence, but economic deterrence, built into the supply chains of every nation on Earth. Whether that deterrence holds, whether the extraordinary gamble that humanity has placed on 143 kilometers of water in the Western Pacific pays off, is the defining strategic question of our era. That answer is being written right now, in the clean rooms of Hsinchu and the proving grounds of Phoenix, in the war rooms of the Pentagon and the strategy sessions of Zhongnanhai, in the export control offices of the Commerce Department and the boardrooms of ASML in Eindhoven. The entire world is watching. Most of the world just does not know it yet. The chips are down. Everything depends on what happens next.